You are listening to the Pencil and Paper Podcast Network.
Hey Ramblers, today's episode is brought to you by Fangoria. Since 1979, Fangoria has been the authority in the world of contemporary horror. As the only sanctuary for horror aficionados in its early days, it has now grown into an empire that expands beyond its celebrated magazine. From t-shirts, coffee mugs, beanies, enamel pins, there's something for every horror fanatic in your world, even if it's you. So head on over to shop.fangoria.com/pencil and paper productions or use code pencil and paper productions at checkout to get 20% off your first order or magazine subscription. Yes, it is a mouthful, which is why there are links in the show notes down below. That's shop.fangoria.com/pencil and paper productions or code pencil and paper productions at checkout for 20% off. Fangoria, first in fright since 1979.
Buy it or we'll tear your soul apart.
You're listening to the Horror Ramblings podcast, the show about all things horror. We hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Horror Ramblings podcast. Due to technical difficulties, we were not here last week, but we're here now, and that's what matters. We don't truly abandon you, and like a good zombie, well, we don't stay down, even with a headshot, which goes against quite a bit of popular belief. But you know what? I'm going to make it kind of like, Night of the Living Dead, Return of the Living Dead, all those comedy movies that come out. It's like you just keep hacking them up, you just keep killing them, and they just keep coming back. So you know what? That's like Horror Ramblings. We're like some vicious zombie that's kind of fun to listen to. Mm-hmm. I am loaded up on caffeine and still tired as hell. That's okay, because it's going to be an interesting day. How you doing, Steven?
Doing all right. I'm hoping that our audience doesn't hear the thunderstorms happening outside the house right now. So if you hear a little rumble in the back, it was not our stomach, it was thunder. So
it could be a giant stomach.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of in the vein of what we're talking about today. But before we, get into all that, we should probably discuss if there's any news that you've seen. I've not really seen anything myself that is really broadcasting out there. I think my whole news feed has just been full of the fact that Jelly Roll didn't win any Grammys and Toby Keith died. I think that's pretty much what my news feed has been, which is kind of weird because normally I still have horror stuff kind of sprinkled in there.
I don't want to speak ill of the dead, so I'm not gonna. I had no sympathy. I'm sorry to anyone who loves Toby Keith. I had zero sympathy when I heard that. I could, Katrina messaged me and she was like, Toby Keith died. And I was like, aw, sorry for your loss. Because I didn't know what to say.
I never really got into, Toby Keith. I know his personal life was really controversial. I did like some of his music. I liked a few of his songs. I feel bad for his family and everything, but sure. Honestly, I think the last time that I heard him sing was when he was at the Country Music Awards, and he won some award. I think he won basically a Lifetime Achievement Award. I think it was like an Icon Award or something like that. And he sang a song that was sort of haunting to his whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it was a good song, and like I said, he had a few songs that I liked, but I don't know as much about him as I know about other celebrities that I'm a fan of. Sure. I could probably tell you what Robert Englund's doing right now. I mean, if the satellite's working.
Sure. Well, just for everyone who may have thought one way about the man, not to get political, but he was a registered Democrat at one time. So, shit can change. Just, if you're hell-bent on staying on your one lane and you think you have to, you don't. You can swap parties. He did. So just throwing that out there. Just think about it, if you would, please. Anyway, news. You want some news?
Yes, please.
Well, First things first, I'm trying to find a few little tidbits that I thought would be interesting. So I know we've talked about Saw 11 coming up this year. I know that was something we were going to chit-chat about last week before our shit fell apart.
That's my bad.
We can't help audio difficulties, goddammit. We can't fix the things, or at least we tried. But anyway, I guess the filmmaker, and I don't know how to say his name properly, so I'm going to try. Kevin Grutert. That's what it looks like to me. He's returning to direct the next film. I think he's the one that directed the last one, Saw X, that I've not seen. So he's coming back. So if you like Saw X and any of the others, I feel like he directed others in the franchise, but I couldn't tell you which ones. But I know his name. So
You may have.
If you enjoy his takes on the material, then you're in luck. He'll be back. Speaking of someone who's back, and I don't know how I feel about this because we've discussed this at great lengths on this podcast before. There is a rumor that another Texas Chainsaw Massacre is on the way, where it sounded like, based on the premise that's being thrown around, is that Leatherface is going to terrorize a gated community somewhere in Texas. That's all we really know. So it sounds interesting, but we saw what happened with the last film, and I think that also adds to my just disdain for this idea, because is it going to be a sequel to that, or are we just going to do what we always do with Texas Chainsaw and try a new timeline? Because we just hang on to I would just, at this point, do something completely out of the blue. You know what I mean? And then this is already an insane idea, but just...
Why is it I want it
to be good, you know?
I just see Leatherface going to take a bite out of somebody or something, like just being really vicious, and he can't because he has no teeth, and so he kills some poor old guy and he takes his dentures.
Yeah, that's the part that worries me, you know, that they're going to keep him old, and you're going to have to start over, man. You can't keep... Because there's no fucking way he was that spry in the last film. I'm sorry.
You know, it would be amazing if they just hear me out here real quick. They never really flat out put it on screen, but they do. There is actual footage of it out there because they didn't use it. He does have a daughter.
That is true.
It would be really interesting to see a new family. Did they have a Texas Chainsaw Massacre film that was like called The Next Generation or something like that?
Yes.
Was that ever a thing?
That was the one with McConaughey.
Okay, well, maybe in the same vein as that, like title-wise, but why not have a story? You know, I'll even say this, and people might not like this. I can't remember which chainsaw it was, but the girl finds out that she's some relation to Leatherface.
That was,
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the 3D one that came out in 2010, maybe somewhere in there.
I didn't mind the story in a sense. I kind of like that they were taking like a different approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows that Leatherface has a daughter. If you don't know that Leatherface has a daughter that they never used in the movies, you've been under a rock your whole life, because pretty much everybody knows that. And I think I think that would be an interesting way to go. What if there was a whole new family, and what if Leatherface finally got to the point where he couldn't do it anymore? Because let's be honest, Leatherface he's up there.
Mm-hmm.
What if Leatherface took on the grandpa role and taught his grandchildren how to be the next generation? That
would make more sense than what they're doing now.
We could still have a Leatherface. You could have two Leatherfaces if you wanted.
Yeah.
What if his daughter married herself a big boy and had a couple big ass kids?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be really cool, and it would be a different story, and it would sort of in a way be a legacy sequel.
Yeah.
That could build upon the original foundation that was there. That's the problem with these movies. You have to sort of build off of the foundation that was already there, or you have to completely do a 180 and tell a completely different story.
I feel like that's what needs to happen at this point. They need to just start from scratch.
Yeah.
Okay, stop trying to hold on to the legacy of the original, because I feel like that's what's weighing it down. Is they keep trapping themselves in this box. They keep saying, well, the thing that happened in 1973, you know, that's we got to stick with that. That's canon, and then we can build from that. But
And now that I'm thinking about it, they could even sort of pay they could pay tribute to the original.
mm-hmm.
If they wanted to do an idea like with his daughter. For some reason in my head just now, I could hear like his daughter talking at the beginning when they're showing the like opening credits and everything.
Mm-hmm.
You just hear Leatherface's daughter talking about how, they said Daddy was a psycho, Daddy was a killer, Daddy wasn't any of those things. And like she talks about how she was she doesn't think anything he did was bad. And maybe Leatherface got killed.
Yeah.
And maybe she, maybe as she's talking, she talks about how, family's everything and it's time to bring the family back to their former glory. And maybe she has like this thought process that this is what they have to do. I think that would be interesting. And they could show clips from the other movies, maybe in the beginning part of all the family that's gone. You could pay tribute to the original films, but then you could build something entirely new. And I think that would be kind of cool, actually.
There are great ideas out there, and the right people are not dealing with it. And that's what makes me angry, is I don't feel like anybody who has been approaching this material, who's came at it to try and put their own spin on it, has done justice to the material. Save for the remake. I'll give it credit for at least trying to do something new while remaking the original. I understand he remade, but I'm just saying, at least they took a different approach. It wasn't just like a one-to-one comparison. It was like, all right, well, what if it's a different family? What if they have different names? What if it just happens to take place in the same time, but it's different enough?
Yeah.
So,
and in all honesty, out of the remakes, let's just put this out here right now. If I'm watching TV and I see that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake's on, the Friday the 13th remake and the Nightmare on Elm Street remake are on, I'm probably going to watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre because I feel like it's the one that is the most enjoyable to watch.
Sure. And I think a lot of that comes down to Arlie Ermey, who is just a legend.
Yeah. And Jessica Biel in sort of a revealing outfit, who was really put together at that point in time.
So yeah, we'll wait and see what happens with that abortion when it happens. So here was a headline that came through that I was really surprised by, because I genuinely thought the show was done, and it is, but I guess I already put it out of my head. But did you ever watch the show Ratched on Netflix? That was kind of like the origin story of Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
We started watching it. We hadn't finished it yet.
Yeah. Well, I thought that, it seemed like there was going to be more, but, time passed and nothing came of it. And I guess now it's official that there's not going to be any more. And I was like, oh, I just kind of assumed that was it because I didn't hear anything. So if you were looking forward to more Ratched, you might as well just put that to bed. It's been, 5-6 years at this point? So
yeah, it really has been. Yeah, that's insane.
What else we got? Let's talk about that Winnie the Pooh trailer for the new movie. I don't know if I'm still not going to say that I'm sold on watching it, but I'll give them credit. At least it feels like they got a budget this time.
I think they actually got like $1 million budget this time compared to what they had originally.
It shows, as odd as that is, it's amazing what a budget can do because it shows.
Yeah.
If you compare the two. The other one just looks so rushed and so slapped together, whereas this actually looks like some time was spent on it. And money.
I'm actually kind of excited for this. I know that sounds weird. I think it's going to be one of two things. It's actually going to be surprisingly good, or it's going to be so bad that you can't forget it. Like, I feel like it's going to be one of those two categories. Because I've seen some pretty bad horror movies, but I love them. Because they're so bad it's good. Like, it's a weird thing that happens with them. But I don't know. I think Tigger looks cool. I like what they did with Owl. Owl kind of puts me in the mind of, Lloyd Would Kill Me. It's a trauma film. I cannot think of the name of it.
Poltergeist,
thank you. It kind of puts me in Owl kind of puts me in the mind of what the chickens and everything look like in Poultrygeist.
Yeah.
Kind
I
of
can see
in the
that.
same, yeah. There's one character that I wish they could put in the film, and I was thinking about this. I wish they could put Eeyore in the film, because I would love to see Eeyore pull his own tail out and just see a big rusty nail getting pulled out of his, where his tail is, and him stab somebody with it, just real slow. And just using that Eeyore voice like, now you're going to be sad like me. Just, I don't know why I think that would be cool.
It would be something for sure.
But I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I'll say that much at least.
I think the worst thing that's going to come out of it, and I know that's just me speculating at this point, but they already said that this is going to set up their big fairy tale universe or whatever the shit. So the Peter Pan, the whatever else was going to on that list. This is it's apparently being set up in this film. So that's what worries me the most, is you have an opportunity to actually have the budget to tell a great story with this idea that you had, but you're going to spend the majority of the film setting up future movies that are going to suck just as hard. So that's just my opinion. I want to be proven wrong, but we'll see.
I don't know. I'm kind of excited about the Pinocchio film they're talking about. They did a Pinocchio horror movie like years ago, and it was okay. I mean, my favorite part of the whole movie is when he's lying to the girl because she can't lock the door, so she has to hold the door shut, and he's lying to her, telling her that he's not going to hurt her and everything else, and his nose is sharp at the end, and it stabs through the door, and it goes through her hand. And it's just it's dumb, but it's also just kind of funny. You know what they should do for Winnie the Pooh? Just going to put this out here. I'm sorry. I'm just making all kinds of suggestions today. Winnie the Pooh's based off of the toys that Christopher Robin had when he was a kid.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
They already did that Disney movie with Ewan McGregor, which is actually a cute movie, where all the stuffed animals are like meeting back with him and they're alive and everything. That would have been a cool concept, that the Winnie the Pooh toys were actually alive and they're looking for Christopher Robin and he's been dead for, years. Just something about killer stuffed animals, I guess imaginary kind of did that for me, which the new trailer for that, I don't know if you saw, but
I didn't watch it because I felt like I saw enough as far as promotional stills and whatnot, and I was like, all right, y'all are going to spoil some of the better stuff in the movie. And I did hear, and if this disappoints people, because it disappointed me just a little bit, is that it's rated PG-13. I was kind of hoping for a gorier situation, but it's fine.
Well, you know what they're good at, though. They're good at releasing a PG-13 and then going, oh yeah, there's a director's cut.
Well, but even like Megan felt like it it was meant to be PG-13, because when you see the stuff that they cut in or they put back into the movie in the unrated version, it's like, well, yeah, that wasn't anything you couldn't have just cut right out. So you knew what you were doing. You just added this extra stuff for this particular thing. So
yeah,
it just feels disingenuous. It's not meant to be that. And you're just like, well, here's some gore because you wanted it. It's like, yeah, fine.
Well, I mean, I guess as long as it's solid, I can forgive that it's only going to be PG-13.
And that's how I felt about Megan. I was just like, that was actually really entertaining. So even at PG-13, I think I would have enjoyed it regardless.
Yeah, and I honestly, I think it's more of a challenge for filmmakers to make a horror film that's PG-13.
Sure.
Because you have to still make it scary without throwing in the gore and everything else. I actually have a question for you that's news related.
Okay.
Speaking of gore, have you seen the Evil Dead news that's been sort of circulating around about a new film, a spin-off, stuff like that?
That was actually the next headline I was going to bring up.
Well, I will listen to what you have to say.
There's a new filmmaker whose name I'm very unfamiliar with. I'm going to try not to botch it. Sebastian Vanacek. That's how I'm thinking it is. I think he is French, if I read correctly. He did a movie called Infested last year, and I guess Sam Raimi saw potential and was like, hey, you wanna direct the next Evil Dead flick? And he's like, yes. So whatever his plans are, he says he plans on injecting that kind of French sensibility, whatever that means. I don't recall any French horror films that I've seen that would give me an idea of what he's talking about, but he makes it sound like it's going to be pretty mean and brutal and vicious, and that's what a lot of the Evil Dead movies have been here lately. So I'm interested. Like I said, after Evil Dead Rise, I was really impressed. So I'd love to see what more they got in the tank. So yeah, we'll see.
I still want Evil Dead on a boat.
Yeah, there's a great idea there. I mean, it's everything you need.
Sam Raimi, if you're listening, we got this. Just give us a call.
Yeah.
some Evil Dead on a boat and Gremlins on a boat.
Gremlins on a boat.
Hell, it can happen. It can happen at the same time.
Yeah, why not?
We can have little deadite gremlins.
Speaking of which, and this is a very odd segue, but I saw a rumor floating around that they're going to have a Scooby-Doo movie where he meets gremlins. So I don't know. I don't know if it's where it's at in production, but I've heard that this is a thing apparently in pre-production right now. So that could
actually work pretty well. Yeah. I think Scooby and Gizmo together, I think that would be kind of cool.
And I guess I would be curious if they're going to utilize the most recent animation style like they did for the Secrets of the Mogwai, or if they're going to kind of put a little adjustment on it, make it their own. Because, I mean, there's so many Scooby-Doo movies they do all the time now where he's crossing over with like Crypto and Courage the Cowardly Dog and all this shit. So are you going to stick with that, or are you going to do your own thing? I don't know. It might not even make it past pre-production. They may just say, nope, no one gives a damn. So we'll see. But
True.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. Seems like it could
that
be
is
fun.
an interesting. That would be an interesting concept.
I'm going to ask you a question. Just yes or no. Tell me why. Would you want to see Chucky in space?
Yes, actually.
So does Don Mancini. So
yeah, Chucky's one of those characters that is so self-aware that he is, without even breaking the fourth wall. Chucky is, to me, the Deadpool of horror characters.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I've always seen him. And so him going into space, I feel like he would make jokes about it being a gimmick that's overdone.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think I would be okay with that, and the marketing for it I think would be brilliant.
I have a feeling just somewhere in my gut that that's what he's going to be aiming for season 4 of Chucky if that gets greenlit, which I don't know anything to say it's not been greenlit, but I don't want to assume anything because USA could change their mind.
Have Chucky on the moon or something, and he's able to use his voodoo power over the whole planet, and he puts part of his soul into every single Chucky doll on the planet.
I mean, there are options. Whatever you want to do.
Man, no, I think that would be cool. I think that would be really cool.
Yeah, like you said, he's a character where at this point, fuck it. I don't think it's that far-fetched. Why not? Did you happen to watch the trailer for A Quiet Place Day 1?
I did.
And what are you thinking?
I like that it looks like they're following different people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the right way to go. It's not that I don't like the family that was in the other two films.
Sure.
I like the concept of following other people. I like the whole thought process of sitting there watching these people, because we already know that you have to be quiet around these creatures. These people going into the film, they don't know that.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be fun to kind of see. And I feel like a lot of people are going to be sitting on the edge of their seats going, you're supposed to be quiet, talking to these people on the screen, telling them that they need to be quiet. I think it's going to get people really involved with the film, which I appreciate. And I just love how they keep finding ways to make these creatures more vicious.
Yeah.
From what I've seen in the trailer, I mean, they look like they're even more vicious than in the other films that we've seen. And I love their use of sound. Like in the first film, the use of silence was just eerie.
Mm-hmm.
And in this one, they really, in the trailer, right when you start the trailer, you sort of sit there and you realize, like, man, is it really that loud just day to day? And I think that they're going to use sound again to really affect the audience and really push the film forward. And I love that. I love when even the sound for a film is done in a way that really makes you either uncomfortable or causes suspense. Some films don't use music for that reason. Go back and watch the first Quiet Place. There's not really any sound at all. They don't even play a score really. So I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt. I feel like certain concepts get pushed out a little bit too far. I hope that they don't continue to make a bunch of movies for this. If they do want to keep creating content about this universe, I would probably do a series.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same.
And maybe, yeah, they could follow a group of people that, are hunting these things, have learned how to hunt these things. And then if you decide you want to tie everything up and finish it all, maybe do one last film, but bring the characters from the series and from the other movies, if that's what you're going to do. Tie it all up with a nice little bow at the end with one more film and call it a day. That's what I would do anyway.
Yeah. I'm intrigued by it still. I wasn't against the idea of the first one, but it took me a minute to kind of get around to it, and I finally watched it and I was like, all right, this is pretty solid. Enjoyed the second one. I would kind of like to see a continuation of the other story thread, since I didn't feel like they felt a little ambiguous when the second one ended. I don't want to say too much if people haven't seen it, but it just felt like, okay, what next? Like I want to see what happens next. And I don't know, I just feel like we're not getting that. But I still have heard that a sequel is still in the works, so we may get that eventually, but it's kind of nice.
And like I said, if they wanted to, they could tell the rest of the story for the second film in a series if they wanted to, and link that to other things. I'm a big fan of TV series and movies sort of intertwining, because I like to get that content in between, and I like to have certain questions answered that maybe weren't answered in the film. And I feel like when they try to do that in another movie, sometimes it takes away from the new movie. So
yeah. I'm kind of hoping that whatever they introduce here in this film will tie into the other one. And it's not just like, well, we're making a movie just to make it kind of a placeholder, Make it actually mean something, have purpose. Alien Romulus will apparently launch in theaters on August 16th, 2024 this year. So if you're looking forward to that, great. Furthermore, and I'm so fucking excited about this, I read that Dan Trachtenberg, who directed Prey, or wrote and directed Prey, is actually officially coming back for the next film, currently titled Badland. So take that as you will. I don't know what it's going to be about, but he's on board and I'm excited. And it's supposed to be another standalone film, if you will.
Now, I did hear rumors as well that they were talking about making another Prey film that was more of a sequel to the first one that came out as well, because they want to bring back the girl and everything.
Yeah.
I don't know how true that is. And I guess if you search Badlands on Google, you get like a lot of Western pictures.
Sure.
So they're thinking that maybe it's going to be predators versus cowboys.
I'm down for it.
Yeah, could be a really cool idea.
As we kind of mentioned before when Prey came out, do more movies like that. I mean, that just opens up a world of possibilities. You're just saying any point in time where something could be interesting to fight a predator, boom, done. And it doesn't have to be tied into anything. And I think it has a strength in that regard. Now, you can sprinkle in little Easter eggs, kind of like what they did with Prey, and they had that little pistol, which raises a lot of questions. But at the same time, it wasn't bound to that idea. It wasn't like, we're just making this movie so you know where that gun came from. It was just kind of a nice little callback to be like, well, here, there's that thing.
I like the I don't know if you watch Rick and Morty, but I like there's a joke in Rick and Morty where they fight a predator in it.
I just watched that
everything
the other
ends.
night.
And the predator throws him the gun. He's like, maybe it's their currency.
Yeah.
It might be. I don't know. That's just hilarious. But yeah, I know I'm excited. I still hope that we get a predator versus a samurai. I still want to see that.
Yeah, that was kind of the hope that I had, is that they would go in that direction. But I mean, Cowboys. I'm still down with that too. That could still be fun.
Yeah, and they're probably going to make a bunch of them. So I mean, if they get to it, I think it'll be good. So,
did you happen to watch the trailer for Late Night with the Devil?
I have not watched that yet. I just saw it on my news feed, actually right before we got on here, so I have not watched it yet.
Well, if you get a chance, definitely check it out. I'm really excited for this one. It seems like it could be a very solid, creepy film. David Dastmalchian is, I think he not only is the star, I think he might have been a producer or something on it, but I can't remember. But that is actually going to be in theaters in March, and then it'll drop on Shudder in April. So not too much longer to wait for that. So I'm excited for that. What else? What else we got? I'm still digging around. Yeah, now there was another thing that came up, and the turnaround on this was a little surprising to me because we got news that there was going to be a new Jurassic movie. I'll just leave it at that because I know we've got Jurassic Park, we've got Jurassic World. I'm sure they're going to try to call it Jurassic whatever the fuck, and then that's what it's going to be, the new trilogy. And they said that David Leitch, who I know he's directed some other stuff, but the most recent thing I remember he directed was Bullet Train. And I think he had something to do with maybe the first Deadpool. He's done a lot of action films. So he was apparently tapped to direct this new franchise or new installment to the franchise. Well, he bounced just the other day, so I don't know what happened because it was literally announced in the same week that he was on board, and then he's like, no, I'm not. So,
wow.
I don't know what that's about. Maybe he had other things going on, but at least with him involved, I was like, okay, at least maybe it could be, a fun action movie because I don't know about you, but I really thought Bullet Train was a welcome surprise of a movie when I watched it.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't have any expectations
really,
for it, and it was just like, holy shit, this is really good.
I loved how it's so absurd, but there's a lot of realism to it too. And I always space on his name, Brad Pitt.
Yeah,
I love him in it because he is every single person in the world in that movie. He gets the crap beat out of him, but he just keeps going. And I love it in action movies where the action star actually does get his ass kicked a little bit.
Well, yeah, because it just, I don't know, it makes them relatable in some ways. Like, you won't wish you could be that guy, but you see him getting his ass kicked, and you're just like, yeah, I'd probably get my ass kicked too, but you keep fighting. There's nothing fun about watching a hero just always win, and you're just like, well, yeah, of course.
I think my favorite scene in that whole movie is when the woman's trying to poison him, and he injects himself with the antidote. He's like, do you have another one? She's like, what do you think, bitch? And she falls over.
Yeah.
That scene still makes me laugh.
Shit, I got to watch that movie again. That was really good. Last thing I've got is apparently there's going to be one more Conjuring film. And that's going to be it. That's going to be like the last Conjuring film ever, at least in the main Conjuring series. I'm sure there'll still be the spin-offs like your Annabelles and your Nuns. And what else did they spin off with that? Was there anything else? I feel like there was another one.
They were going to do another spin-off, but they didn't. And I cannot think of what it was. I can't think of his name. It's in the second Conjuring film, the real tall, skinny guy. They think it's the dog.
Yeah.
I can't think of his name.
Okay.
Really cool character. They were going to do a spin-off, but it fell through for some reason.
But
I don't think they have any other ones.
Could be. For some reason, I thought there was another one. There's just a lot of spin-off sequels. Because you got, 3 Annabelle movies and 2 Nun movies at this point? So, it's quite a bit. But this will be directed by Michael Chavez? Probably Chavez. I'm going to say Chavez, because people are going to be like, you stupid. Chavez. So, Michael Chavez is the one directing. He did The Nun 2 and the last Conjuring film. So, it's in hands of somebody who knows the universe. So, am I excited? I don't know. Maybe. The last one was kind of like,
Yeah. Nothing will beat the magic of the first one, I don't think.
I don't think so. I guess I'm more curious, what's the threat going to be in this time around? Is there some threat that they haven't actually tackled? Because I think they skirted over the Amityville stuff in one of the movies, but they never jumped straight into it, which, fair. We know all about the Amityville house. I just think it would be fun to do some big, high-profile thing like that, but I don't know what else they had outside of that as being high-profile. So, or the Annabelle doll, I guess that's the other one.
Yeah.
But yep, that's all the news I got for this week. It's
right.
It was busier than you'd imagine, but there were just a lot of little details that kind of dropped out.
Sounds like it. I don't know. I'm on the fence with real quick on the Jurassic World, Jurassic Park stuff. Again, that's something I think they should do a series of and base it closer on the books. because then you could really get into a horror element, and something about Jurassic Park, but horror just, it sounds really nice.
It works. It's the concept is there, and funny enough, that would actually kind of segue properly into what we're talking about today. Because
I was just gonna say, of course, what we're talking about is a little bit bigger than dinosaurs.
Sure.
But
well, I pitched this idea to you because it's always been a fascination of mine when it comes to kaiju movies. That is a term that was not really present when I was growing up with these movies. You know, we didn't call them kaiju movies. It's just like, oh, we're watching monster movies, or we're watching giant monster movies, or we're watching, or just saying, I'm watching a Godzilla movie. And even if you're watching King Kong, it's like, what are you watching? Godzilla movie. You know, because it was a term of endearment to say, I'm watching a big giant monster smash some shit.
yeah,
But the question I wanted to kind of explore is, if you take a look on any streaming service, if you went to any video store, if you go to any classification for these films, horror seems to be in the label almost every single time. And it's always fascinated me because I don't think I would necessarily classify a large number of these movies as horror. Now, in some cases, I can argue in favor, yes, absolutely, that could be a horror film. But I don't feel like it fits the bill for all these movies. And I guess I'm curious, what I want to explore is, like, why has that genre been associated with giant monster movies for all this time? And no one seems to question it, for that matter.
yeah,
Because, all right, so I'll use an example. Starting with King Kong, the original 1933, and Godzilla from 1954. Because these would be kind of your two base creatures that we all know and love. But do you see them as horror icons? Do you see them as horror figures? You know what I mean?
See, I would, with the original films, I would probably classify them a little more into the horror genre, just because, yes, they're giant monsters, but at that point in time, I don't think we quite had seen, something quite like that.
Mm-hmm.
King Kong was being given sacrifices, eating women,
Yeah.
Godzilla was killing people, destroying things, There's something about that that's just... You probably hear sirens in my background, by the way, everybody. Sorry. There we go. But I think I would classify those films more in the horror genre, just because I look at how the audience would have viewed that at that point in time. And I feel like at that point in time, when people viewed that, I think they probably would have been a little scared. Like, I feel like you would have had the same feelings that you would have in a horror movie.
I can agree with that, because if we take a look at we've talked about the classic Universal films with Frankenstein, Dracula, and Wolfman, and so on, and how they don't necessarily feel terrifying to us because we're so desensitized with so much other nonsense. So much so that what were we watching? We were watching an episode of Full House the other day, and that's a whole other story. And they were watching, or somebody wanted to watch The Wolfman. And I was like, oh, cool. And they were just like, well, Stephanie can't watch The Wolfman or she'll be afraid. And I was like, what? No, she won't. It was like, if it was Nightmare on Elm Street or something, sure. But The Wolfman? No.
Yeah.
She's not going to be you're all ridiculous. So I'm sitting there chiding everybody. Come on, let her watch it. She ain't going to be scared. And then, of course, what's the whole thing about, oh, my God, I'm so scared because I saw The Wolfman. It's like, oh, shit. So... yeah, I guess through a child's eyes, the Wolfman could be terrifying if you've never been exposed to that before, anything like it. So I have to kind of look at it from that perspective. Maybe what I'm considering scary is not the same as what other people... I guess King Kong, I don't see as a horror film because I feel like it fits better in the fantasy adventure category.
I could see that.
That's where it just kind of hits for me, because there's nothing scientific about King Kong. It's almost like being transported into another world, because when they get to
Yeah.
Skull Island, it's like this lost world of dinosaurs and creatures that has forgotten the world. So for me, that's why I have that particular classification for it. Even, sci-fi and everything doesn't really work because it doesn't fit that bill. Fantasy seems more like it. Adventure, because you're these swashbucklers going on an adventure.
Yeah.
It feels that way to me. Godzilla, on the other hand, absolutely 100% would say yes, horror. While the American version may not be as horrific, there's still that idea that you're just talking about this giant monster coming in and obliterating the city. People are running for their lives. People are dying. We see the horrors of what he's done. That's another thing that I don't feel like they do very often anymore, is there are scenes, and this one gets me all the time, is, I think it was depends on the edit you watch, because I know the American edit can really fuck shit up. But it was like after his big initial attack, and they're just, before they decide to really go on the offensive to try and take Godzilla down, you're seeing all these people just injured and dying all around. People are scrambling to get help. Families broken, and you see this little girl just looking at her mom, and then they put a sheet over her, and she just starts crying. And the cry from that child just breaks my heart every time. Because they're showing you the horrors. And again, that's supposed to be like a reflection of the atom bomb going off in Japan at that time. And so they're reflecting that back. So therefore, that's genuine horror, like real life horror being masked under this metaphor. So that fits the horror bill. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, in all honesty, I am horrible about classifying fantasy films. I don't know what it is about me and fantasy. I love fantasy films, but I never really look at something specifically and go, oh yeah, that's definitely a fantasy film. I've always been like that for some reason with that genre. But hearing you talk about Kong, that would definitely fit more into I would say like an action fantasy type thing. But with Godzilla, I would look more horror for Godzilla. And I know we've talked about subgenres before, and I know that they can't, exactly do a subgenre category for everything on streaming services and stuff. Sure. But I think kaiju horror should have its own category because it is very specific. Yeah. And, the newer Godzilla films, and I know I'm jumping around from us talking about the original. But the newer Godzilla films, I would say more that they have horror elements. But I've always looked at them, especially over here in the United States, and we've talked about this before. The United States is currently doing what they did in Japan originally with Godzilla. Godzilla sort of became an action star. So I don't really see the newer films as necessarily horror. Right. I see some horrific moments in those films, but I see them more as action movies to a degree. They're like creature feature action movies to me. They just happen to be giant kaiju creatures. Right. I know, and here's where it gets kind of funny. I would actually say that it's almost like King Kong and Godzilla have switched roles a little bit, because Kong Skull Island, I would classify that. I wouldn't necessarily say it's 100% a horror movie, but I would classify it closer to a horror movie because it's very suspenseful. And there's a lot of horrific moments in it compared to, I think Kong over here in the United States, present day, since they introduced him in like Skull Island and all those films, like I feel like his movies are a little bit scarier than the American Godzilla films that we've gotten.
I see that.
But overall, I think when Godzilla's pissed, he's definitely scarier than Kong. Sure. So yeah, I don't know. I think more action movie when I think of these films present day, just like the newest one coming out. What isn't it just Godzilla, Kong, or
the New Empire.
That's called. Yeah, New Empire. Sorry, I couldn't think of that part. To me, that looks like an action movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess even kind of breaking down, because I don't want to just stick with Godzilla and Kong. I know they're the easiest ones to kind of reference, because there are others that could argue in favor of what I'm trying to get at here. But as far as Godzilla goes, you got 30 plus movies in the tank, and I'm combining the Japanese and the American. And out of all of those movies, maybe 4, 5 at most would I consider horror films, or at least put in that category. Because take a look, we said the original Shin Godzilla, absolute fucking horror movie, if you ask me.
Yeah.
-1 really fits in that category, even though it kind of has a few more dramatic elements that people could be like, well, maybe not. There's still a horror element to it because you are tense for these people. You care about these people, and that's kind of the point of a good horror movie, is that you don't want anything to happen to your leads, so you get tensed up. You feel it, the tension. You're just like, no, don't hurt them. So that in turn feels like it fits in that category. But then you start looking through the rest, and I feel like they fit more into fantasy, action, adventure, or sci-fi, especially when you start getting into the space stuff. And I don't feel like horror does it justice, because I don't feel the tension. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just not there. I don't even think I would fit movies like Mothra or Rodan in that same category, even though they are technically doing the same thing, destroying cities. There's still an element that tension is missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's a movie. A movie that I'll mention that has a kaiju in it, but you only see the kaiju for a short moment in the film, and it's the build up to it. It came out in 2020 called Underwater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Horror suspense. That's all I can say about that film. It's kind of a slow burn, but you see these smaller creatures that are like attacking people, but all of these smaller creatures are basically like the children of this giant Cthulhu-looking creature.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see him very much in it, so I guess you couldn't. A lot of people will be like, well, you can't say that's a kaiju film. Well, you kind of can, because that's the thing that's causing all the problems. Not seeing very much of it, I think, is what adds to the suspense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to say something real quick, and I want your thoughts on this. Now, I have not seen -1. I have not gotten lucky enough to go to the theater and see it, so I'll have to wait until it's available to stream or purchase. But I know we've talked about it, and I know that there is a smaller form of Godzilla before he gets the radiation in his system and everything. To me, if they wanted to do a Godzilla horror film, like a full-fledged horror film, do a story about that island and about that Godzilla hunting people.
Yeah.
I think that would be more of a horror film. And, it's hard to classify what makes a horror film. That's why I think with kaiju films, it's really difficult. You have movies like Pacific Rim, which is an action movie. That's all that is to me. That is not a horror film in any sense of the word. There's a kaiju film with Anne Hathaway in it, where she controls a kaiju.
Mm-hmm.
It's a comedy. I don't care what anybody says. It's a comedy movie. It's not a horror film. And looking through the Godzilla films, I'd have to say that's really, there are scary moments in them, most definitely. But to me, Godzilla almost turned into and I mean this in a good way, almost turned into a Saturday morning cartoon in a way.
No,
there's a lot of hype, a lot of action, and it's a great thing. It works for it, but I don't think we've really gotten a lot of Godzilla horror films. And the fact that they classify all of these monsters, these kaiju, as horror films, I think it's mainly just because of the fact that they are giant monsters and they're destroying things. I think that's why they just sort of just slap them in the category with the rest, even though they're not. They're not just straight up horror films. A horror film is very specific in what it does, and I don't think that some of these newer Godzilla films, I don't think they would fit that category.
No, and a lot of, I guess what I'm trying to get to the bottom of, especially with a lot of this other, going back, because I want to go back to around the time I'd say Godzilla came out, or right before it came out, because if you look at that time frame somewhere in the 50s, that seemed to be a real big boom in what could be considered cheap B-movie horror. Roger Corman stuff and what have you, where he's getting started. Some of these, now these are technically, or a lot of these are American productions, and I can see how they are being marketed as a horror film. Like, it makes sense, despite what the title may be. Tarantula. There's a great one. Just big fucking spider coming in. Oh, it's terrorizing everyone. I know that in some aspect that is very much, okay, well, instead of Godzilla, it's a big spider. And there you go. So would I classify that under the same brand as horror? Yeah, kind of, because it's meant to invoke that. And in the 50s, that would probably terrify anyone. But when you go through some of the other kaiju films, like I mentioned with Godzilla, or hell, even, all right, we're going to come back to that one. I'm going to put a pin in that one. Godzilla fighting other monsters and everything. That just seems like a throwdown, action throwdown, like I said. However, this is where I had a moment. Depending on how you approach it, you can make it horror, and it fits. So there's another film in the Godzilla series, and then I'm going to bounce to another series altogether. Godzilla vs. Megaguirus from 2000, I think is when it came out. 1999, 2000, somewhere in there. There is a sequence in the film that is very much horror.
Yeah.
Like if you came in thinking, it'll be, just typical Godzilla fare, nothing. There's a sense of what you expect out of these movies, big monster coming around, smash, smash, smash. That's it. That's what you expect. But in this film, it has something to do with these little dragonflies that come out of a black hole. One gets loose, and there's literally scenes in the film that's straight out of a horror movie. Like, this thing comes out of an alleyway and tears up this couple, and you're seeing blood flying everywhere and shit like that. That's horror, okay? So that one would definitely fit the bill, because now you're terrorizing regular people. We're not getting a grand scope of things. It's just buildings and shit. We don't see anyone die. We're not seeing anyone get hurt. You can just assume no one's there. But in that situation, they're getting murdered. They're getting slaughtered. We're seeing a horror scene, like a serial killer or a monster crawled out of a sewer or whatever. That's horror.
Before you get into the next series, I want to just piggyback and say something just real quick, because I just thought about this. Talking about classifying like the original Godzilla as more of a horror film and things like that. Something just kind of occurred to me. In a lot of these films, even like the films from the 50s, the thing that they are really good about doing that I think makes it more so classify as a horror film is that there is no other threat. It's that monster is the threat. It's that monster is against humanity.
Yeah.
And it's going to wipe humanity out. And that's the scary thing about it. In the other Godzilla films, some other monster comes out and it's trying to, destroy everything. And Godzilla kind of comes as almost like a protector. And I think that is what sort of causes the shift from it being horror, because like I said, they sort of just, they put it out there that this monster is there and there's nothing that any of humanity can do about it because the monster's too strong. Perfect movie that I'll just mention it and we can talk about it later in the podcast, but that way you can go on to what you were talking about. I was just going to mention the monster from Cloverfield.
Mm-hmm. See, now that would fit in a horror aspect. I would agree.
Yeah, and you think about it, that monster, it's the only monster in the whole movie. There are little monsters that branch off of it, but they're doing what that monster needs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all of us as humanity trying to survive some great threat that we can't destroy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what maybe classifies it more as a horror film. It kind of fits the whole horror film aesthetic. It's almost like it's a giant slasher. Like the Kaiju is a giant slasher, and nobody can take it down, and it's trying to kill as many people as it can.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as you were saying, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I mean, that I think that's the distinction that needs to be made. Not all of these films are going to fit under that category. Again, going back to the 50s, some of the stuff they were doing there, like the Giant Claw or the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, for Christ's sake. I mean, that's pre-Godzilla right there. That's the inspiration, or one of the inspirations. So those films make sense under that banner. There are certain ones that fit under the bill of this banner, but I don't see Son of Godzilla being a horror film. It just doesn't work. You get into something like Gamera. Now, This one gets tricky because Gamera is a kaiju that I don't feel like people talk enough about. I think he's finally starting to get a resurgence. These films are really, really dark, despite their intention being for kids, or at least that's how it comes off to me, because Gamera is supposed to be the hero for all children. But if you watch those movies, they are incredibly violent. You know, I mean, by comparison, Godzilla is tame. But there's hardly any blood, hardly anything spewing all over the place. But in Gamera movies, holy shit, things come off flying, there's blood spurting everywhere, and it's just like, well, there it is. And then if you get into the 90s versions, there was a trilogy of films that they did. They lean into the horror a lot. So if I was to say who fits the horror bill more, Godzilla or Gamera, I would give it to Gamera. I would say that's a horror kaiju series because it really goes in hard with a lot of stuff. I mean, the trilogy they did in the 90s was equally as dark. And when I say dark about the stuff in the 1960s, wishy-washy way of describing it. I mean, I would say that the 90s versions are much darker. But like I said, there's just moments you're watching it and you're like, this is a film for kids, right? And then some shit just goes flying off and it's gory. And it's like, holy crap, this is for kids? That kind of thing, you know? It's bizarre. Yeah. I don't quite understand. But I don't know. I feel like there needs to be some division. I don't feel like they all should be classified under the same banner. You know, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman is not the same as King Kong. You know, in regard to what it is,
I wouldn't even classify that as a kaiju film. You know?
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
It's honestly just a science fiction piece about a woman that becomes giant. I mean, technically, it's what, the second Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, where they make the baby giant. Mm-hmm. You could technically say the baby's a kaiju if you wanted to.
Yeah, if you're gonna split hairs.
It's like. I was looking up a list of kaiju films in case I had seen anything kind of off the wall while we were discussing this subject, and for some reason this list like has thrown in some like random like alligator and stuff like that. I would not classify that as a kaiju film. That is a creature feature, even if that alligator is larger than a normal alligator. To me, a kaiju is some creature that's not exactly natural, like. I don't think, yes, Kong is a giant ape, but he's not a regular ape.
Yeah, I feel like there has to be some set limit. Like, how big do you have to be to be classified as a kaiju? Because at minimum, we know of Godzilla, he is at the smallest probably about 50 meters tall. I think that's the smallest he's ever been. They've played with that. So if that's your baseline, then Kong, or OG Kong, would technically not fit. So because he's probably 20 foot, I think. So there's a size difference.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems too, as to why these films get put into that category, because I think some people just don't see the difference in a creature feature like about giant snakes or giant alligators or giant animals and these other creatures like Godzilla and Kong and all them. Because let's be honest, look at it this way: the easiest way to tell if it's a kaiju or just a giant animal, put them in a ring blah 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 blah. Put them into a wrestling match with each other. Who's going to win that fight?
Yeah.
If Godzilla fights a giant alligator, guess what? The giant alligator might bite him a few times. He's going to use his atomic breath and it's over. These creatures have some kind of ability. They have something that makes them different. Even Kong is different in the regard that he can handle the radiation that is dished out to him. Like when Godzilla hits him with the atomic breath, he's able to handle that. Any other creature would be obliterated.
Sure.
It's its own category. That's the thing. One movie that sort of, to me, kind of is on the fence. It's kind of a horror comedy, I would say. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's called Love and Monsters.
Sounds so familiar, but I don't think I've seen it.
It is on Netflix. I think you can get it in a few other places. If you get the chance to watch it, it's really good. All the animals get mutated, and they all turn giant, like insects, all kinds of things. And this guy goes almost cross country to find this woman that he wants to help, because he's got a thing for her. It's him and his dog. That's it. But all of the creatures sort of have, I wouldn't say that they necessarily have abilities, but they are mutated.
Mm-hmm.
So they're, they are slightly different. I would probably classify them maybe within the kaiju realm of possibility. There's like giant centipedes and things like that. And I would say this is more of a thriller comedy, not a horror comedy.
Yeah.
That's something I would definitely check out if I were you. And I want to give a shout out to something that I think is horror to me. The movie didn't get a lot of love. It's the Kong with Jack Black in it and all of them.
Yeah.
The scene where they're in the swamp and the bugs attack all of them. That is something straight out of a nightmare.
Yeah, that, considering Peter Jackson directed that one, it's really, really hard not to argue in favor of it kind of being horror. But it teeters a line, man, because there's a lot of fantastic elements about it, a lot of action, adventure elements about it, but then it's like he sprinkles in these horror elements because that's where he came from, his background. I mean, like, the tribe on the island itself, holy shit, there are something out of Cannibal Holocaust. And then, like you said, the pit with the bugs and everything makes people creepy, crawly, just like, oh my God. Yep. But then you look at the rest of the film and, like, toward the end, I mean, it's tragic, but that's more like a love story type element,
And that was something that I really was thinking about while we've been talking about this whole subject. I feel like to make it a horror film, some horror villains you can sympathize with a little bit. Like Jason gets to a point where you realize that he just wants to be alone. Yeah. And you kind of sympathize with him a little bit in that regard, like a little bit. To me, with these kaiju films, it's almost like with the horror aspects of them and the ones that you would classify as horror, you really can't sympathize with these creatures because they don't have any other reason other than it's just in their nature to do what they're doing. Look at the original Godzilla film. I don't think you can necessarily sympathize with Godzilla.
True.
Look at -1. I don't think you can necessarily sympathize with Godzilla in -1.
Not at all.
I can't speak. Yeah, I can't speak for that. And you have to just make the kaiju scary in these films. And I know that's a lot of things. There's an image from -1, and Godzilla's got his arms back and he's just roaring, and his eyes. I kind of chuckled at first because when I saw the picture, it almost looked like he had googly eyes just because of the way the lighting was when the person took the picture. But somebody was like, this is the scariest image of Godzilla I've ever seen. And I was thinking about that, and I could like hear the roaring. I could hear the scene in my head. And I'm just thinking about that, and I'm just like, you have to show these characters being ferocious, being vicious. I think that more so classifies it into a horror genre when you just have there's this primal thing to it, and I feel like it makes it a little more horrifying when you make them, you make them primal. And I think that comes back to us as a society, as human beings. It's almost like a Neanderthal type deal where we fear those big creatures that are trying to kill us that we can't stop.
Right. And see,
and I think, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say that I think with a lot of these, the sympathy, I'll 100% agree, and that kind of takes some of it off because Kong, I feel like, is the most sympathetic of all the kaiju because he has relatable emotions that we can see, we can identify. Godzilla's, it takes a while before you get there. You can kind of get a sense once they start making him a little bit more sympathetic or heroic, I guess you could say, that you can start to see emotion, but it's very hard. But even to argue in another sense, another kaiju film that no one talks about, but I kind of think it's fun, and I don't know if I would put it in the horror category. I can see it being horror, but again, based on a lot of the criteria that we're kind of laying down, I don't recall scenes where the people are in jeopardy to the point where you're just terrified for them. And that's Gorgo, which is kind of like England's version of Godzilla. And I feel like that is a movie with a sympathetic creature. When you finally learn what's going on in the film, you sympathize. It does something in a way that you hadn't quite seen at the time with a lot of these movies where, the creature is the big bad and it's like, we got to kill it. We got to kill it. But in Gorgo, she survives. She's alive and well at the end of the movie because she wasn't there to terrorize. She just wanted her kid back. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's why I would find it hard to put that in a horror category, because while the idea of it, sure, is terrifying, when you find out what that creature's there for, you're like, well, yeah, I'm on that thing's side now. It just wants its kid and it wants to go home. You're the idiots who started this. You're the idiots who caused this whole debacle. If you hadn't done what you did, none of this movie would be taking place. None of these people would be dead. So the creature is not the villain here. You are. You see? So it just doesn't... The creature has to be the monster. It has to be the villain for me to see it as a horror movie. And a lot of the times it just doesn't work, especially when it comes down to the ones that when it's this creature versus that creature, whatever, it has to be something a little bit more primal. Like you said, it's got to be about the monster and whatever it's doing.
Yeah. And to be honest, the newer version of Godzilla, the version that we have here in the United States right now, I find him scary in the regard of, if he needs to fight, you know that he is capable of just about anything. But as far as just Godzilla in general here in the United States right now, I don't find him scary. To me, he just wants to be left alone. He just wants to rest, and things are getting all out of balance, and he knows that he has to keep things in balance. And once he does that, what does he do? He goes away so that he can just rest, be on his own. And to me, to make it horror, it would be Godzilla is coming up out of the water and just leaving a path of destruction, not stopping, wanting to just destroy everything. Mm-hmm. Everything just gets destroyed when Godzilla's fighting. That's the thing. It's not that he's purposely going and destroying everything. And I would almost say that the fact that these kaiju are so big, I feel like sometimes that does make it hard to put them into a horror setting. Like, you have to write it a specific way just because they are so big. And I think sometimes that takes away from the more personal aspects of it. That's why -1 did so well. They were able to really show the human part. And there were scenes that I've seen of the film where, and I know this is going to sound weird, I almost forgot how big Godzilla was, because they show this giant monster, but then they show these people, and there's scenes where it almost looks like Godzilla's looking these people right in their eyes. Mm-hmm. And you for a moment there, you're like, these people really want to square up with this thing. But then you're like, but they can't square up with this thing because it's giant. Yeah. There's just something in that just, even talking about it, like, it just it sends a shiver up my spine. Like, I couldn't imagine that, Mm-hmm. It just, yeah. I know I talked about a horror film on here called The Lake, which was about a kaiju. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the best reviews. I'm still going to give it a watch because I haven't watched it yet. But from what I've seen, like trailer-wise and everything, they have a way of making this creature, again, very primal. It is just there to kill. It seems like it has a reason. It seems like people are sort of invading its turf. And from what I remember, I think some people take some of its eggs. But even then, yes, it has a reason, but this thing is just so quick to attack. Yeah. Like, that's another thing I've noticed, especially with Godzilla. In a lot of these films, when there's people around, it seems like Godzilla almost refrains a little bit these days. Mm-hmm. Was it the second one where they detonate the nuke to give Godzilla more power because he's weak? Yeah. Down in his cave, like, that took all of the horror out of it for me. When the scientist, he touches Godzilla, and you see this person touching Godzilla and like telling him goodbye and everything. To me, it was almost like he was meeting a childhood hero of his. Sure, yeah. For the first time, and it's a great scene. I love the scene. I think they did it really well. But that doesn't scream, oh man, Godzilla's terrifying. If it were Godzilla -1 and that Godzilla was sleeping like that, and he touched Godzilla, he'd got 8 in 2 seconds. Sure. And it would have been a terrifying scene that would have ended very quickly, but it would have been terrifying. Yeah, I think it's really hard to classify these films sometimes. I think it's one of those things where you really have to look at the aspects of the film. And like I said, I'm all about more of the primal thing. I think it's monster versus people, not monster versus monster. I think that right there, if it's two giant monsters fighting, I think you automatically have to assume that it's probably not going to fit the horror category, but maybe look into it a little bit closer, because it could be something where it's two vastly different monsters that are both attacking the same city or something, and then they end up, facing off.
Right.
That could be an interesting horror concept in its own right.
Sure. I really don't know what more to say about it. I feel like the classifications are off. I feel like not all kaiju movies are horror at all. It just doesn't fit, there's it's a subgenre that doesn't need to be classified under one thing or another.
Yeah.
And just it boggles my mind when I go, usually on Max, that seems to be where a number of them are. And
yeah,
you'll find, you look under horror and it's like Godzilla. And again, it's not just one, it's all of them. And it boggles my mind. But as we said, times change, and what we would have classified as horror that doesn't scare us might terrify someone else. I guess I have a hard time believing that anyone would find them terrifying, or at least certain ones of them terrifying.
Right.
All Monsters Attack is not a horror movie. That is a child's movie that I will watch, but it's a child's movie.
Now, would you say that might be a way to look at it with classifying them as horror? Like if it's just more of one monster against people and not against another monster? Do you think that would be like a good way to sort of classify that?
I think you'd probably have to look at the content as a whole, because even like I said, with the Gamera films, with that one Godzilla film with the dragonfly, there are certain ones that have these horror elements to it. There are scenes in certain movies. I know that I'm trying to think of, I think it was Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, and Godzilla was pretty much like the villain in that one. Like that's how they portrayed him, and everyone else was the good guy. And there was a scene in there where he passes by this hospital bed and this woman's freaking out. She's like, "No," like that, and then he just walks away, and then it stops, and you're just like, okay, he's gone. She's taking a sigh of relief, and the next thing you know, his tail comes swiping in and knocks down the building. You're like, holy shit. So that kind of has a horror element to it, because it's kind of a dark, like, oh shit. But I don't see the movie as a whole, like, as a horror film in that regard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Horror elements. So it's really, really difficult, because
go ahead.
I can't say that if you going way outside of kaiju films, you think of certain movies you've seen and maybe have like that one scene that's kind of disturbing, but the rest of the movie was not like that. Would you then classify it under a horror film because of that one scene?
That's true.
It just doesn't work like that, I don't feel. And I feel like these movies get misclassified. And not that it really matters, but if you're not looking for horror, but that's where they're all set, then you're just going to assume that's where you find them, and that's not a genre you're interested in, so you'll miss them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm trying to get at here.
I think the biggest thing that I would take away from our whole conversation on this subject would be that whoever's in charge of classifying these films on the streaming services should probably actually watch them.
I mean, sci-fi
and learn to classify them better.
Sci-fi is much as I don't feel like that really sets the tone properly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel like that's as far-fetched as horror sometimes, depending on the movie. Like I said, the originals, sure, they should fit in that category because that might have been their intention. But you start getting into some of the bigger ones where there's aliens and stuff like that, sci-fi, man, that's where it works.
Yeah. I think it's more of I would probably classify them as a sci-fi, fantasy type action thing. And you could put, because I've seen it on the streaming services before, you can put that a film has horror elements in it.
Sure, yeah.
And that's really what a lot of it is there's horror elements to these films. Not necessarily completely horror, like you said, I mean, I know of films and TV shows for kids, animated things in the 80s, the 90s that, I mean, they have some scenes in them that you would just be like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, what did I just watch, you know? So, I mean, yeah, I get where you're coming from, and I understand, like, your frustration with this. It's one of those things where, yeah, if I wasn't a horror fan and I just was like, I've never seen Godzilla. I wonder if Godzilla's, you know, pretty good. And then I see that it's in the horror category. I'll be like, well, it's horror. I don't really want to, you know, people are missing out because they're not taking the time to actually maybe do a little research and realize that, yes, there might be some horrifying things in these films, but at the same time, you know, there's not necessarily horror overall. It's just like -1. I've heard a lot of people say that's the scariest iteration of Godzilla they've ever seen.
Agreed.
And, you know, that's true, but I think I would classify that movie more, you know, like everybody said, it's a war drama that Godzilla just happens to be in.
Sure.
But, you know, I definitely, I think I'm going to have to go through. I know I was talking to you about Godzilla films. I think that even though some of them might be seen as a little campy these days, I think they're still enjoyable to watch. I think that I need to go through. I know you told me, I think, was it Pluto TV you told me had a Godzilla channel?
Yeah.
Which I've checked out. I couldn't remember if it was Pluto, that's why I was double checking, but I have watched a little bit of it, of the Godzilla films on there. And, you know, I forgot there was and this is completely random, I forgot in the 90s they did an animated series.
Yeah.
It's based off of the Godzilla from the 90s movie that came out, so not everybody's, you know, particular favorite Godzilla.
But I think that version is actually more beloved than the film version. From what I hear, the internet tells me shit sometimes that surprises me, so I'm like, all right.
I thought the Godzilla from the 90s version was interesting looking. I will say that. You know.
I actually remembered a film series that I just recently got my hands on and watched for the first time. I won't say recently, but sometime last year, that I feel like fits a kaiju horror concept perfectly. And I'll explain why. It's called Digimon. And the concept of it is, like, the story takes place maybe early 19th or 18th, 19th century Japan. You have warlords, you know, who are trying to take over the prefectures and whatnot. And you have these people who are being attacked, slaughtered, taken prisoner, all because of this warlord. And you have villagers who get away from this, and they go to pray and summon to the Lord Digimon, who's like a demon god. And they pray to him, they try to get him to come help, and then, of course, the spirit rises and then comes and lays waste to this dictator, I guess would be the best term for it. Now, while the idea, per se, might not seem very horrific, there are horrific elements to it. So, while our kaiju is not exactly the bad guy, what he does isn't necessarily great. You know, it's comes in smashing, killing, doing what he can to right the wrongs that this asshole did, and then goes away as a spirit. So I feel like that kind of has some elements of horror to it, where that kind of like leans on that. It's a revenge flick. I mean, some of those spit on your grave, man. I know it's not a one-to-one comparison here, but I'm just saying that's a revenge flick too that I would classify under horror. So
definitely,
I think Digimon, that whole series, could fit under that loosely. Like, if I saw that under horror, I wouldn't be like, no. I'd be like, yeah.
I think the biggest thing, as weird as it sounds, my biggest takeaway from this entire conversation thus far, not even just with kaiju films, but films in general, I would maybe do a little research, because sometimes films just get slapped into a category, and that doesn't mean that they fit that category.
Yeah.
You might be missing out because of the fact that it was put into just stereotyping is wrong, people.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, you go onto some of those streaming sites sometimes, and I'll see a movie that's sitting under a category that I'm just like, this does not belong here at all. Like, I don't understand how it even got put into this category. So it's like you said, if that's your first impression of a movie, is the genre that it's labeled under. So you're looking for something that's funny, and then you see this movie that you've never heard of before, and it may have a funny moment or two, but it's not a comedy. And you go to click it and be like, well, it says it's a comedy. It sounds interesting. And then you don't laugh. You just got screwed because, I mean, it might have been a good movie. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I'm just saying. You went looking for a comedy and you got stuck with something that wasn't quite the comedy you were looking for. So all because it was labeled incorrectly, or at least from my perspective, it was.
Yeah.
I don't know. I agree. There needs to be a little bit more due diligence on where you put your movies. Especially, I feel like everything does have a broad genre that it fits under.
Yeah.
You know, you have your broad genres and then you can nitpick it down to whatever, but a drama is a drama, a comedy is a comedy, a horror is a horror. You know what they are when you see them. You're like, oh yeah, that's that. So,
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I wanted to explore that, and I'm sure we could talk about it on other shows during other movies and whatever we're talking about with guests if need be. But that's a baseline of it all, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think it's an interesting subject to talk about, and I never really, to be honest with you, I never really thought about it with Godzilla all that, you know, and kaiju in general. You know, right there shows how popular Godzilla is. You talk about kaiju films, like you said, you just say, I'm watching a Godzilla movie, and it doesn't even have to be Godzilla.
Yeah, I mean, it's a synonymous term, I think, that's a simple term that you're just like, it's a Godzilla movie. People know
There's what we should do. There's what they should do. Instead of putting all the kaijus in different categories, just call it the Godzilla category. That'd be cool.
Sure, why not? Everybody will know.
With that. But, man, yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, it's quite a bit, and I still don't feel like we unpacked it all, but there may be other things.
Honestly, I think this is a subject that we could bring a particular guest into, because I would love to hear their opinion on all of this as well, I think.
Sure. Yeah, we got some people who need to get on the show and chit-chat with them.
Yeah.
But if you got nothing else, Ramblers, what do you think? Do you think all the kaiju movies should be horror? Do you think that there's some exceptions? Like, what do you think? Because I would love to hear from the audience on this. And if you've got little details you want to break down to us, please, by all means, let us know on Twitter at Horror Ramblings, or send us an email at horrorramblings@gmail.com. Tell us everything. We will talk about it. We'll read it out here. We'll make a discussion out of it. If you want to discuss horror with like-minded individuals, join our Facebook group or join us on Discord. You can find us on Instagram. You can support us over on Patreon at patreon.com/pencilpaperproductions. You can leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcasting app and point your friends to whatever podcast platform they're using, because I know there's so many out there. Tell them to find us on that platform as well. We should be there. If you're using Spotify, see if we put up any questions and polls. And finally, everything can be found at pencilpaperproductions.com/horror-ramblings. Links are in the show notes down below.
And remember, guys, stay spooky out there.
This has been the Horror Ramblings podcast. Join us next time for even more.
This has been a Pencil and Paper Podcast Network production.